You certainly don't need to get everything done within 7 days. Nothing bad is going to happen if we just leave it 2 more days. There's no rush. The worst has happened already. It's not going to get worse from here. Until a year ago, I had only seen one dead body in my life, and cut to 12 months later and I've witnessed a full cranial autopsy and embalm. A lot of people apologise to me for not knowing what to do. How would you know what to do?
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
Today we have funeral director and doer of many great things, Mon Jones. She is a funeral director at the Last Hurrah. The Last Hurrah's mission is simple. First, to offer reasonably priced funerals and uniquely personal farewells and end-of-life rituals that reflect each individual's authentic self. Second is to offer a gentle and secure circle of support to those grieving a loss. Thanks for being with us, Mon.
Thanks for having me. That was a very accurate summary, I think.
Now, most funeral homes are a family affair, and it seems like the Last Hurrah is also becoming a family affair. Tell me, what motivated you to start working at the Last Hurrah?
It was really just a perfect storm of coincidence and timing and opportunity. It was not on the cards for me. It wasn't on my radar. If you'd asked me 12 months ago if I would be doing this now, I'd laugh it off. But yeah, it was just a moment in time where I happened to be looking for a different line of work. They needed someone. There were a few stopgaps that I filled in the interim, and then it just sort of evolved into me becoming part of furniture. So yeah, it was a really natural progression, and yeah, I don't know, happenstance, fate, if you believe in fate. But yeah, I'm certainly very grateful for the opportunity and loving every minute of it.
And so your sister is Stas Jones. She's
Yep.
the co-founder with Kimber of Last Hurrah. And I believe there's also extended family involved.
Yes. Yeah. Our cousin Chelsea also has come on board.
Fantastic.
Awesome. She was moving over from New Zealand, and again, just there was a gap that needed to be filled, and she came on, and yeah, it's going really well.
That's great. And tell me, obviously you're from New Zealand, if people haven't picked up your accent. North,
Yep.
south, whereabouts are you from?
Top of the South.
Lovely. And with your heritage, when you think about the ethos of what Last Hurrah stands for and what Kimber and Stas have created and you're adding to, is that deep connection with community. And do you believe that that's actually coming from perhaps your heritage and your background and how you value family? So I think it's whānau that you actually refer to it.
Yeah, I mean, the term whānau means family, and I think in a funeral context, being from New Zealand, being exposed to sort of Māori funeral culture, I think what Stas and Kimber are trying to sort of bring into people's lives here is more of a home funeral, or bringing funeral into the home and extending that to sort of demystifying it and having a bit more control over the process, slowing down over the process, being with your person after they have died. So there's sort of that element of it, I think, is really what we're trying to do in a way. Make it a little bit more hands-on and a little bit less sort of disconnected, and something that a funeral director sort of takes away and does on their own, and making families part of the process. So bringing people into the process, I suppose, is what we try and do.
And from what I've seen of just really through your social posts has been that you seem to celebrate family in all forms and regardless of what that is conventionally defined as. Do you want to tell me a little bit about how you work with the loved ones when someone has died, and how do you go through the process of making sure that family is at the centre?
That's a really good question, because there's sort of a legal element to family and who organises funeral, who's the official next of kin. And we try and sort of open that circle up a little bit. So there's often not just one person who is the official next of kin dealing with and going through the funeral process. So it's not unusual for us to have an arrangement with sort of 3, 4 10, 15 people involved and all bringing their ideas to the table. I often sit in an arrangement with families who have sort of like 6 kids. And I mean, they can all have different ideas about what they like and all of those different things and try and come together and create something that everyone's happy with. It doesn't always work, but that's certainly the goal. So sort of extending those options to the wider family.
And I've had conversations with other funeral directors, and they certainly say the same things that you're saying to me. But I think, what would you think would be the point of difference with, I suppose, let's be honest, you guys seem to be going a lot further with accommodating requests. Not everyone would consider having the tote as a venue as something that would be a conventional part of a funeral. So it seems to be that your brief or your ability to accommodate requests is a lot larger scope than most are normally used to.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're quite good at is sitting and listening to all of the different things that people are saying about their person. It can be anything. Dad worked at a golf course for years and years, and the golf club was his entire life. And so that could be a throwaway comment that someone makes, but in our mind, we're sitting there going, oh, well, maybe a golf course would be a really good venue for this funeral, or maybe we could hand out golf balls as everyone walks in, or we integrate that into different parts of the ceremony. So I think we're just naturally quite good at picking up all of those, throwaway comments about a person and sort of thinking, well, if this was a really big part of their life, let's say the tote, for example, they went to the tote all the time. It was their favorite place on earth. Okay, why don't we try and have the funeral there? Or a really good example recently was a gentleman whose wife had died. He was renovating a combi van, and as we were going through the process of looking at all the photos and creating the slideshow, they've traveled all over Europe in a combi, their whole life. So, why don't we try and use a combi as the hearse? And that conversation was, oh my God, we're renovating a hearse. Maybe we can use this. Turns out it wasn't roadworthy, but we got there in the end at the last minute. But all of those little throwaway comments, I think we are constantly trying to grab and think, how can we make this more about them? That makes sense. So if all of those little personal items that just, come out when you're having a conversation with someone about someone they love, all of those little things matter. And because I write ceremonies, well, I'm always searching for those little things that are going to make it more about that person.
And can you give us a little bit of an insight about your backgrounds? Because is it that diversity that allows you to then look at things with a little bit more innovation? So I know yours is in food.
Yeah, well, originally in food, and then I worked in logistics for a lot of years. I think my background is really an organizational role. So I'm, a highly organized person, and I can, schedule very well, and I'm pathologically early to everything. So that's great. But I think the other thing that sort of helps is I don't come from any other funeral home. I've never worked anywhere else. So I don't have any preconceived ideas about what a funeral should look like. And the only funeral company I know is the Last Hurrah. So this all feels very normal to me. I don't really have anything to compare it to. So I guess I just, being a good people person and a good listener and an attention to detail sort of person, listening all the time, picking up on little quirks and little nuances and thinking about how I can sort of weave that into a funeral ceremony. And I'm just really lucky that I work somewhere that basically anything's on the table. There's limits, we operate, if as long as it's within the law, we'll give it a go. But that support and freedom is there. So I'm really, really grateful for that because that's quite rare.
It is. And tell me, can you talk me through the process when you're sitting with a family and how you craft? Like I know you were just saying you're listening to certain tidbits that they actually drop. How do you craft that ability to hold space as a funeral director and say the appropriate things? And
well, I probably don't always say the appropriate things. I'm sure I've dropped some clangers. often how I'll start is, I invite them into the space if they're coming into our space. If I'm going into their home, it's a little bit different. But, sit down. Can I get you a glass of wine? Would you like a cup of tea? We've got a couple of cats in the office, so they're usually lurking around. And all of those little things work to put people at ease. If you're going to someone's home now, they're in their own space. So that ease is there straight away. But when they're coming into our space, that's sort of how I do it. Often the first thing I say to a family is, all right, hit me with your ideas, dreams, things you hate, things you love about what you want this ceremony to be. And that is a very open-ended question. But, I don't think I've ever had anyone sort of sit there and not know what to say. Someone will usually chime in and be like, oh, look, Dad, I don't know, he was just obsessed with his garden. Like he was just out there all the time. He was a great father. He loved Billy Joel and, all these little things. And we just most people are sort of saying things like, we really want to make sure that this reflects him. And like garden straight away, I'm thinking, okay, what are the outdoor venues we've got in our catalogue? Do we have somewhere in a garden setting? It just takes off from there. And I've got a list of things that I need to run by a family, but I would say it comes out in a different order every time. It just sort of flows organically. Like I would jump on that garden thing first, because getting a venue confirmed and locked in is really priority number one, because everything else flows off that, and it gives the family the ability to tell people when and where the funeral is going to be, and people can start planning accordingly. So I'd start, thinking, we've got these great outdoor venues. What part of town do you want it to be in? How many people are you expecting? And that sort of narrows to a venue. And then we sort of get into the slightly more challenging part of, okay, do you want to see your person again? Do you want to spend time with them? That can be in our vigil space, or it can be in your family home. We also arrange for that to happen. And, usually from there, that sort of, morphs into, what would you like them to be dressed in? Do you have any special clothing? Are there any kids in the family? What would they maybe want to do some artwork we can place in the coffin? And just all of these questions just sort of flow at the time. And then there's all of the sort of more mundane hospitality, like food, drink, flowers, seating, all that sort of stuff. But for me, that sort of comes at the end. I'm always asking, have you got people out of town or overseas that might want to be involved in a funeral? Would you like us to live stream it? It generally goes for an hour, sometimes less, sometimes more. But the first half of it is really me just asking questions. What do you want this to look like? What do you want people to feel when they come and send off the person you love? What is important for us on your behalf to try and convey about this person to the people in the room? Are there any fears or worries? All of those things just build and build until you sort of get to the pointy end and you're like, okay, well, pretty confident we'll use either this or this venue. They might really like a particular kind of food. Okay. Oh, mum just obsessed with Thai food. As soon as someone would say that, I'd be like, okay, cool. Caterers I know doing Thai, all of these little things sort of come into play. But I think I start the arrangement with a very open-ended, basically, what's your dream funeral look like for your person? And I get a lot of my, meat and potatoes from there.
It's a really interesting process that you invite people to think big initially, because before you get caught in the logistics. So that's a really fascinating technique that you have. But I do love the fact that you definitely are a logistics woman when you say, okay, venue, right. First thing. Now tell me, with the importance that you place on really getting people to slow the process down, how do you do that? Because I think traditionally we've been told to, do it in a certain way. So how do you encourage and put people at ease?
I think just generally, because death and funerals are a little bit mysterious, people don't generally know how long a person can last. I mean, their physical being. One of the things that was a big surprise for me when I first came into this line of work was just how long a person can wait. It's in a climate controlled environment, and that was quite eye-opening for me. And, I've, Stas is my sister, I've been close-ish to not within the business, but, just through knowing her, how it all works. But even to me, it was like, oh my gosh, you can wait that long? So I don't think many people realize that they can just wait.
And how long is that, Mon?
Well, it's different for everyone. There's a lot of different factors that play into the speed of composition and the circumstances. And then there's a lot of factors in terms of the family and what they may or may not be willing to see or experience. So I guess sometimes you can wait too long as well. From the time someone dies until the time the funeral is, it's quite a stressful, full-on process for a family, and can be quite a lot of anticipation. And I know a lot of people sort of have this, once the funeral's finished, it's like a weight off. It's like, okay, now I can move on. And that, if you extend that time too long, sometimes that can extend that sort of heightened stress period as well. So yeah, how long is that period of time? It can be a month, can be 2 weeks. You certainly don't need to get everything done within 7 days. So one thing I find myself saying often is, you can give yourself a little bit more time. If someone's passing is sudden and unexpected, it can just take a few days for everyone to come back down to earth and be in a position to, think about flowers and food and drinks and all of those things that, down the priority list. But yeah, I've certainly had to say on multiple occasions, so let's just give it a few more days. Why don't you just rest, and I'll call you in 2 days and we'll go from there. Nothing bad is going to happen if we just leave it 2 more days.
And what's the response from families and loved ones when you say that to them?
Relief and a bit of, oh, okay, like I've been given permission to just rest. Because I think a lot of people, I'd probably be the same, just go into hyper organizational mode and go, okay, I've got to do this and this and this and this, and I've got to call the funeral director, and I've got to choose a coffin, and I've got to choose flowers, and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes that can be a good thing because it's a nice distraction from your feelings. But I think people need to hear it from someone else that, like, oh, okay, I've been given permission to just slow down.
Isn't that interesting that we don't listen to our own bodies? Because obviously, especially if it's an unexpected death, that's that fight or flight that we automatically go into.
Yeah.
But we have to actually wait for someone else to tell us it's okay.
It's very, very interesting. And if I can take responsibility for just telling people to slow down, I'm very happy to do it, because there's no rush. The worst has happened already.
Yeah.
So, it's not going to get worse from here.
That's very, very true. And I'm sure, as you said, when you tell people that, they just must be relieved.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, nowadays, it's almost rare for everyone to live in the same city or the same town in a family or in a friendship group. So having a bit of extra time, okay, well, I'll call Jim, he's in the UK, he's going to come over for the funeral. When does he have to get here by? It's like, oh, cool. If you've got people from coming overseas, let's just give ourselves a few more days so everyone can get here and do what we need to do. There's also another way we sort of extend the funeral date too, is by having the cremation first and actually having a memorial instead of the funeral. So what that basically means is, instead of having the coffin present at the funeral, we just have the ashes on the memorial table. So, I mean, if you're going down that route, there is no time restraint. If the cremation's already happened, you can just have the memorial whenever you're ready. And we have done that with a year or 2 years between when someone has died, and that's absolutely fine. There is actually no rush. But, that's a very personal decision, and every family is going to make that differently. And there's a million things to weigh up in making that decision. But yeah, time is there, and there's a way of doing it if that's what you're looking for.
And tell me, I'm fascinated about, on your website, you clearly state your prices. You also clearly let people know that you offer a cardboard coffin to every person who uses your service. Tell me a little bit about the motivation behind that. Why have you decided to be really transparent and then also offer that cardboard coffin?
I think the philosophy of offering affordable funerals is basically how the whole thing started. I know for Stas and Kimber, that is something that's really dear to their heart. And I won't speak for them, but I would say it's like number one on the ethos of when they first started the business. And I think funerals cost a lot of money, right? So, and it's a lot of money to come up within a very short amount of time. And it's a huge stress for people in an already very stressful situation. So it's really important to us that people know exactly what it's going to cost, and there's not going to be any surprises or hidden extras or anything like that, which is why we have all of our prices listed on a website like that. And from my first engagement with a family, when I first send them an email, I include a quote in that, because I want people to know what they're in for from the very beginning. Usually the first quote I send has lots of things on it, optional extras or whatever. This is how much they are. You don't have to take them, but they're there, and I want you to know exactly how much it's going to cost you. So I think that's just being a good person, like not giving anyone a rude shock when they get the bill. And, from a business perspective, people, I think it's just good business for there not to be any surprises. We've got a really good record. We don't have any issues with people not paying our invoices. And I think that's a big part of it. So there's also that element too. But I think we just want everyone to have a nice, respectful funeral that really reflects the person that they love.
And I know for ourselves personally, we had 4 friends who have died in the last sort of 18 months who have had to crowdfund in some way, or each sort of nominate what part of the memorial they're paying for, or, someone's paying for the drinks, someone's getting the catering, that kind of thing. Is that something that you commonly see, or have you seen an increase in that as time's gone on?
I wouldn't say there's been an increase. I think we've always done it that way. And by done it that way, I mean, if you want a potluck or bringing your own flowers, all of those things, I love where people do that.
Can you explain the potluck? Because not everyone will be familiar with that.
Sure.
I love the term.
So when everyone brings a plate, everyone coming to the funeral will bring something along, and instead of the family having to pay for catering.
Yeah. And when we say plate, we're not literally meaning plate. We're talking about a dish for people to eat.
A plate with food on it.
Yeah.
And they're the best. Like, the food is just the best at those funerals, but because it's all homemade. But everyone coming to the funeral feels like they've actually been able to do something to help. So, it's like I think it's just a really beautiful, loving act to give food to people who are struggling. And just the food is just better. So it's a really nice thing. But it's really common for us to see people all chipping in and paying for a component. I've never been asked, but we don't usually sort of separate the invoice out to a number of different parties. People just come together and figure that out. Flowers is a really good one, because I often see people who are like, oh, I'm going to have to pay $550 for a casket spray. That's a lot of money to drop on flowers. And it is. But you know what? One of the most beautiful arrangements I've seen was just a pile of cut gum leaves on top of the casket, and it cost nothing, like literally just from the park across the road. So you'd certainly don't have to. And I think this sort of comes back into that. There's no script you have to follow. There's no rules. If you don't want to spend that on flowers, you don't have to, but you can still make it really beautiful. You just got to be a bit creative about it.
Yeah, and while we're sort of talking about the ways in which to be creative, how have you incorporated ritual into the different ceremonies that you provide?
That's a really good question, because I know Kimber, one of the co-founders, this is really her wheelhouse. And it's never something I gave a lot of thought to until I started working at the Last Hurrah, and I've sort of been getting more into it and more impressed and surprised that this wasn't something I'd ever considered before. But just maybe it's like a bit of a sort of white guilt thing where you're like, oh, we don't have our own rituals, we're just white. But we actually do. And, one of the things we do in our ceremonies is a candle lighting ceremony, where we'll speak a little bit about fire and what it evokes, and how it's been used historically, and how it's been used in ritual historically. And we invite people up to significant people to come up and light a candle near the coffin. And that sort of the fire will just be there throughout the ceremony, and just highlighting what fire has meant over time and how we're using it in this context. It's just like a really simple but lovely thing. We incorporate silence as a little bit of a ritual sometimes. So, sometimes can be quite a heavy ceremony. A lot of people are crying and talking about some really heavy things in some cases. And then sometimes we'll just go, right, we're just going to have a moment to just reflect and just think about those things about that person that you really love. And it's a really great kind of circuit breaker of attention, I suppose, and give everyone just take a breath. Ritual might be too strong a word for that part of the ceremony, but it's a bit of a resetting.
And is that something that you have kind of in your bag of tricks, that if you see and you're reading the room and it's really, really heavy, do you introduce that? Or is it something that's already pre-planned with the family?
For me, it's scripted.
Yep.
I'm sort of at the beginning of my celebrancy journey, and I would love to get to the point in my career where I feel confident enough to just sort of go off road and introduce something like that. Kimber probably would and does it really, really well. And it's, just picks the right moment for it to happen, and it's just beautiful. I really hope I get to that point.
Well, it sounds like you're very much on the right path to get them on.
I hope so. I have very good guidance.
And tell me, what sort of things have surprised you since coming on board? You've obviously surprised at how long you can wait with someone's funeral. What are the other things that have come as a surprise, even since Stas and Kimber started the business, because you've been on the sidelines as well?
On a personal level, the biggest surprise for me is that I'm able to do it and that I feel like I'm doing okay at it. It's never something I'd considered before. Until a year ago, I had only seen sort of one dead body in my life, and it was shocking and difficult for me. And then, cut to 12 months later, and, I've witnessed a full cranial autopsy embalm, and it does feel like a big deal, but it doesn't feel like this horrible thing. It's like it's a part of your job, but also like a beautiful thing to witness in a weird way. So it's just been a huge shock to me that was in me and I'm capable of it. Because I say this quite a lot, but none of us realize what we're really capable of until you're sort of pushed and you do something and you're like, oh, I can do this. So yeah, the biggest surprise to me is that I'm able to handle a dead person.
And tell me, Mon, are you comfortable to talk about that experience where you'd seen the person who had died a year before?
When I've seen in the past?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't the first interaction I had with the Last Hurrah of seeing a dead person was very gentle and very slow. So, first it was, we've got someone in our care they are wrapped in a shroud, so you're not going to see their face. We'll take you in and just be in there and see how you feel. Like, that was pretty much it. I'm like, full of like, yep, I'm just going to go in there. I'm just going to do it, like psyching myself up for it. And you go in there and you see them and they're all wrapped up and they put a little electronic candle next to them in the mortuary, and it's beautiful and they've been cared for really lovely. And you're sitting and you're like, oh, what was I worried about? Like, this is so no big deal. And then it's like, oh, okay, we've got a person, do you want to maybe watch us do a dressing? And you're there but not touching, and then you do that and you're like, oh, that was okay. And then cut to 12 months later, oh, we're doing a full embalm of someone who's had a cranial autopsy. Would you like to come and watch it? Wow, this escalated quickly. But the reason we do that and the reason we witness those things is so we can understand the experience when we're trying to explain it to a family, because it's hard. It's a hard thing for a family to go through, knowing that has happened to their person, and I can't guide them through that or give them any information on it if I haven't seen it myself. That's how I feel about it anyway. So I sort of feel like if I haven't gone through it and witnessed it, how am I going to explain it to someone else? And sometimes that's part of the job. I don't think many people like the idea of that happening to a loved one. And a lot of people are very unaware of the coronial process and what goes on. And just knowing about it demystifies it a bit and makes it a little bit less scary.
Mm. That's why in the guide that I wrote, My Loved Ones Died, What Do I Do Now? There is a bit that I cover off in relation to the coronial process if someone does have to go to the coroner, because there is that sort of mystery about it and what does it mean. And just on the point that you were saying that previously the first time that you saw a dead body, that was before you started at the Last Hurrah. How was that experience for you? When you look at that experience that you had personally, how were you treated then to how you treat people now?
Wow. It was in a church and there was no one in there. So, I mean, I was a kid. I don't know, I mean, like 10 or something like that. And it was a great grandmother's funeral. My great grandmother's just with the open casket in the middle of the aisle, you know, at the front of the church. So you walk in and there's no one in there. And obviously my parents were there holding our hand and whatnot. But it was sort of just nothing's really explained, you know. I'm sure mum and dad were probably like, now we're going in to see grandma and she's not with us anymore. I'm sure they went through that, but I think it was, yeah, it might be an age thing too. I was just like, oh, this is weird and why is she dead? And like, you know, all that stuff. But I think when we're having a vigil and someone's coming in, I'm always thinking maybe this person hasn't seen a dead person before. How do I make that as comfortable as it can be? You know, just come in, have a seat, have a drink. Now, your person is looking great, they're beautiful. You're free to touch them if you want to. You can pick up their hand. They're going to feel cold because they've been in the fridge, but they're still the person and they're yours to, you know, kiss or whatever you want to do. Kids are an interesting element because they've got lots of questions and I love to be able to answer all of those questions, but it's a little bit, you know, some of their questions are like, oh, right, wow, you really went there. You know, they're quite, like, I had a kid ask me once, why do their eyes look like that? Oh no, that was this kid was asking me, what do eyes look like after someone dies? And, you know, they deflate a little bit. So having to explain that to a kid is challenging, but a very valid question. And maybe them knowing the answer to that question makes them less terrified of all of this stuff.
Yeah, I had the privilege of recently interviewing Lauren Breen and Shelley Skinner from Lionheart Camp for Kids, and they have a research paper that they released and it's available on their show notes of their episode. And it was fascinating. They had collected all of the questions that children ask on the first day of camp because there is a doctor and a social worker that actually comes the second day to answer those questions. And it is amazing how frank and oh man, they go there. There is no filter whatsoever. So I think it's safe to say that if you think that a child's not seeing or not knowing what's going on, you're mistaken because they see, hear, think about everything. So, yeah. And that's why I liked when you were referring earlier about when you're talking with families, you're asking them whether there's children and whether they'd like to actually do drawings. What are some of the other things that you do to, you know, include children in the process?
Along the kind of craft line, our cardboard coffins, which are the majority of the coffins that our people use, are basically a blank canvas. So one thing we do quite often is a family will come and pick the coffin up and take it home for a few days before the funeral and have a bit of a family decorating session, and getting kids involved in that is really cool. I know I'm working with a woman who is pre-planning her funeral, and it's a long way in the future, but what she wants to do is bring her coffin home while she's still alive, decorate it with her grandkids together, like as a sort of group craft project. And she's going to use that process as a way of trying to explain to her grandkids, you know, like, I'm going to be in this box one day. And, you know, how do you feel about that? You're part of creating this box with me and it's going to come with me forever, and use it as a bit of a way of opening up those conversations with kids. And that's just awesome. But yeah, the physical decorating of the coffins are a really good one. We've also, you know, got a lot of sort of sensory toys and colouring in books and things we set up if I know there's going to be kids at the funeral. We also occasionally set up a sort of quiet space for kids that might be neurodiverse or just really struggling and need to get away. And that can be a really, really great thing in funerals where a young person has died and there's a lot of young friends there. We've created, quiet spaces for them to get away to, and that's always really well received and well utilised. There's a few things like that we do. Kids coming to a viewing or a vigil is a different thing again, because, how are we going to include them in this ceremony that we're all having together as a family? We sort of set up our viewing space with a coffin and a little cocoon, so you can be there with and experience it and also have the choice not to view. So, we find most people do, or they may get there and be really apprehensive about it, and then we'll just move closer and closer and closer to where the coffin is, and eventually they go in there. And so knowing if there's going to be kids at the funeral or at the viewing is really important for me to figure out, okay, what little things we're going to get in place.
It's lovely that you've got that consideration. Now, I'd like to talk about the other considerations that the organisation has, and I know that you have funeral support for people in need. You have considerations in relation to people who have died in custody. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you support those people?
Yeah, so with all of our funerals, all of our families donate $100 to our philanthropic wing, and that money basically accumulates and sits there to be used in a situation of need. So, it can be any situation, and there's lots of sad ones out there, but just one of those happens to be we use that sometimes for deaths in custody. So if someone comes to us and they have no next of kin and no family and no friends, we may use it in that situation, or, a young person in terrible circumstances. The circumstances are usually not great for there to be a need. And the decision-making process around that is really just, the directors get together and weigh up the situation and all of the parts of it and all of the people involved and decide whether this is going to be a good use for that money. And they deem that, a death in custody is a really good use of that money. It's definitely a case by case. They're not all the same, and they're all just weighed up on individual merit. But coming back to that, why is it important that we are transparent about pricing and we offer affordable funerals? It's all part of that everyone deserves a funeral and to die with dignity and to be cared for in a loving, supportive way, regardless of their situation.
And also there seems to be programming that you have around sort of connecting with families even after the funeral. So I know that you hold an annual tree planting event.
Yeah, we do. It's awesome. It's a really amazing day. I've heard someone describe it as Woodstock with death. So it's on a farm just outside Malden in Goldfields region, Victoria, and we have it once a year in April every year, and everyone who has had someone that we have looked after gets a tree to plant for that person. So every year there'll be people coming and planting trees for the first time that have had someone pass the previous year, or anyone in years before that who wants to come and sit with their tree or have a picnic or anything like that. So we usually have a band, we have the local Jar Jar Rung people come and do a welcome to country and a smoking ceremony. And it's just a really beautiful day. It's a bit of a picnic sort of music affair. And it's absolutely beautiful.
And is it on one particular property, or it's a revegetation project?
So it's on Stas and I's parents' farm, and they have sort of allocated a portion of it for this project. As a contribution really to host people and look after their trees and give them that space to get away to.
That's incredibly generous of your parents.
It is. They also end up with lots of beautiful trees and lots of beautiful stories. My dad loves it. Like, he's a really social person. So anyone who's coming up to look at their tree, because people pop in throughout the year too. They might just want to come up and sit with their tree or whatever. And he loves that and has a chat with them. And I think it makes them really happy.
That's amazing. And what do
Mm.
your parents do? Because, the two of you have obviously really opened your hearts and support other people within the community. So where did that start? Like, what did your parents do? Did they model this behaviour?
Yes, yeah, absolutely they did. Probably not like in their careers as such. I know there's a lot of sort of nurse aides in my family, so a lot of people have had caring jobs for sure. Dad is in sales, so he's a people person, obviously. But I think I don't know if there was a sort of direct sort of path into this work. They've certainly always modelled treating other people well and being a good person to your family and your community and all that sort of thing. So that's always been there. I've never really thought about it. It's just there, but yeah, not everyone does have it just there. So I know it's special, and I'm really grateful for that.
And the fact that they can also be part of, what has been created and see that literally grow on their property must be an amazing thing for them.
Definitely. And like, I think Dad's probably they're getting repeat visits now because it's been sort of happening for long enough. And, I think he gets a real kick out of people coming back and, oh, look at how much your tree's grown, and, hearing their story. And like, everyone's got a great story to tell, and yeah, I definitely think he gets a kick out of being able to do that for people. I don't think he'd do it otherwise. It's certainly a lot of work for him, the watering, and, there are a certain number of trees that don't make it through the year. So, there's usually a bit of a, okay, planting day's 3 months away. Let's just do a tally up of those that haven't made it, and all right, down to the nursery, we'll backfill these ones. So it's a lot of work, but it's definitely a labour of love.
Let your dad know I used to work at the Royal Botanic Gardens, and even they have trouble getting all of the plants to survive. So let him know, don't be too harsh on himself.
I'll definitely let him know that. It is also, central Victoria, and it's water is not always around. So he's got a good system going.
That's good to hear. And tell me, what does the future hold for, Mon and, Last Hurrah and the team? You've expanded, there's quite a few of you now. I think that it started off with just, Stas and Kimber. And now, how many is in the team now?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe 10, not all full time, but, some casual, some full time. But yeah, it's definitely growing. And I think the goal is just to be able to do this for as many families as we possibly can. I think there's probably, the idea of having more people sit down with families and do arrangements. But I think that'll just sort of all happen quite organically. Personally, I just want to get better at it, and especially the ceremony creation part of it and making beautiful ceremonies for people. It's the best job ever. I just want to get better at it.
Well, I think that I'm sure that the families that you have been providing services to don't realise that you're wanting to improve. I think that they would just be really happy with what you're already providing. So don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, pretty sure they are.
And tell me, given your experience, what advice or encouragement would you give to families when they do have a loved one die? What would be the advice that you give to them?
I'd say that they don't need to make any snap decisions in the moment. Don't even really need to choose which funeral director you go with straight away. Probably just come back to that. Just take a breath, and we can slow this down, probably first and foremost. And another thing I would say is that there's no rules or script that you need to follow. Often families I feel like they come in with this list of things they think they need to do and that they think they need to do quickly, such as, oh, I've got to drop $500 on flowers, or I've got to do this. I've got to have it in a chapel. I've got to do it this way. All of those things. I think just a reminder to people that there's no set way of doing this. Most people, if you're lucky, haven't done this before and aren't very experienced at it. So don't feel like you've got to sit down and know the game, because that's what you're paying us for. A lot of people apologize to me for not knowing what to do. Like, how would you know what to do? Like, hopefully you haven't done many of these before. And most often it's the first time, and that's fine. That's what we're here for. So, yeah, I'd say don't feel bad about not knowing what to do or not knowing the process, because how would you?
I think that's beautiful advice to end on, Mon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.